I think sometimes movies or shows about our industry can feel kind of alienating, and I really love this felt like an exciting introduction into the world. I think we gave the audience just enough to understand how the world works, but still keep it, somewhat mysterious and somewhat playful and fun. Pieces about our industry can be quite cynical. In some ways this is, but it's always fun and it's always about the love of filmmaking. And I think that's what I really appreciate about it, is that, like, as a filmmaker, I felt like we were portraying sort of the absurdity and beauty of what we do.
Hi, I'm Jamie Hitchings of Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify their skill set. You can learn more on filmmakeru.com. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on our YouTube channel. Every week, we interview film professionals, and this week we're joined by Adam Newport-Berra, whose work includes The Last Black Man in San Francisco, The Bear, and The Studio. His cinematography has been screened at festivals around the world, including Sundance Film Festival, New York Film Festival, South by Southwest, Telluride, Cannes, Toronto, and Tribeca. Today, we're going to be discussing The Studio. I had the opportunity of talking to Claire Kaufman previously regarding the set design, and I'm delighted I get to speak with you today, Adam, about the cinematography. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, the first question I have for you is what drew you to the studio? How did you conceptualize the overall aesthetic when you were reading it or when you were thinking about taking it on as a project?
I had heard about the project and I thought the concept was funny, but I hadn't read the script yet. But I heard that they wanted to shoot, the show in as many one-ers as possible. And that immediately piqued my interest. I love shooting one-ers. I've done a lot of them. And I find it's just such an inspiring way to make movies and shows. So I immediately begged to get a meeting with I begged my agent to get me a meeting and to, intro me to Seth and Evan. And they sent me the script, and the script was hilarious. It was really great for the pilot. And I got a meeting with them, and we just talked. And they had a very simple, idea for the approach was shoot as much in a one as possible. Shoot every scene in one shot, and even do one episode in one shot. And I actually find that sometimes those really simple directives can create some of the most sophisticated work, because it kind of immediately creates this obstacle you have to jump over, which I think is really exciting. And it just makes you very creative, and it makes you problem solve in a different way. And so for me, that's sort of the pinnacle of filmmaking, when you're set up to do a task that you don't know how to pull off, because I think that's what really sparks the most interesting work.
Can you describe kind of the emotional tone and atmosphere you were trying to convey with the lighting and cinematography? Were there any references you were using, like films, artwork, photography that inspired kind of your visual style?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, when I knew I was going to meet with Seth and Evan, I ended up putting together this like almost 100-page lookbook of different images and clips from films that I loved. I just really wanted to come with a lot of firepower and show how excited I was about the project. And Seth and Evan really wanted to convey this sense of anxiety and panic and fear at all times. And I think that gave the camera a certain freneticism. But at the same time, we also wanted to honor like sort of the old world nostalgia and glitz of Hollywood. So it was like really fusing those two things together, which is really fun because you have something that, a camera that's quite chaotic and quite fast and dynamic, but then you mix it with this really nostalgic kind of glowing golden feel of Hollywood. So we got to kind of pull from a lot of my favorite references. One of their big touchstones was The Player, Robert Altman film, which starts out with a big wonder moving through a Hollywood lot. So that was sort of like the first touchstone. And then from there, we knew we wanted to be more chaotic and a little bit more immersive. So we were looking at Children of Men, which is just an incredible film and does some really amazing handheld camera work that's just always inside of the scene and just feels like part of the action. And then I really, really loved the work of Mikhail Kalamazov, who's a Soviet director. He made a movie called Soy Kuba. He also made a movie called The Cranes Are Flying, and he was making these movies in the 50s, and they were just some of the most elaborate camera work to this day. I mean, some of the most complicated shots you've ever seen in your life were done 75 years ago. and they're with cameras that are, the size of humans is really just incredible. I mean, they're obviously smaller than that, and they were the some of the first filmmakers to really engineer shots in this way that no one had seen before. Using ropes and moving people in and out of buildings and moving cars. And I was just totally blown away by that work, and I knew that if they could pull that off that long ago, we could do something with all the tools we have now as impressive. So that was just a real inspiration for me.
Yeah, I wasn't even when I was thinking about the oneers, I wasn't even thinking about the one from Soy Cuba, but that's
Hmm.
amazing, an amazing shot for sure.
I've been a camera person for 30 years and I fell in love with cinema. I heard there was free film school in France and I wanted to get into the French film school. I really didn't know anything at the time, but I knew at least how to take pictures. So I said, I'll try for the image department. And then when I miraculously got into the French film school, I fell in love with working with the camera. You're following what's going to be in the movie. So that immediacy that the camera allows is what I loved from the beginning. I'm Kirsten Johnson, and this is my course about documentary cinematography.
So let's talk about the cinematography for just a moment here. You mentioned the word frenetic, and you wanted to cover a lot of things in oneers, but I noticed that this time when I watched it, because I watched it before and I watched it from kind of a set design perspective. This time when I screened it, the camera spends a lot of time on close on Matt's face, and it's kind of we kind of see the emotionality of the scene play out on Matt's face, or he knows something, he's got a premonition that something's not great is going to happen. Can you talk about why you decided to, for the lack of a better word, park on Matt's face so much?
Yeah, I mean, Seth is an incredible actor. He also has impeccable comedic timing, and he's also one of the directors. And I think that was really helpful. I mean, it's the last few projects I've done, I've worked with directors who are also acting in the projects. And at first, I was intimidated by that. I was worried that there was going to be too much attention. They weren't going to be able to give attention to the camera. But what I realized is that I, as a cameraman, have like an ally inside of the set, inside of the scene, who can help tell the story. And Seth does such a good job of telling story through facial expression. And because we're not shooting coverage, a lot of times we're not always on someone's face who's speaking. And so sometimes the reaction is what's gold, right? And I think also just Seth's position in the industry is just one based in absurdity. There's the line that he got into the industry because he loves movies and now his job is to ruin them. That's sort of the iconic line. And so I think that absurdity is what Seth is able to convey through his face, this mix of excitement and passion and emotion with just utter disappointment and shame and embarrassment. And I think that he does such a good job of blending between those that he can really just set the tone of a scene with the raise of an eyebrow. Um, and so he was someone that we kept going to. Obviously, he's the main character of the show, so we wanted to ground the show in him. But yeah, he's such an ally when it comes to finding the right comedic timing of the scene when dancing with the camera.
Mhm. Yeah, his performance was impeccable. I
Yeah,
was blown away by it for sure.
yeah, and he does
So
he does such a great job of also not stealing the scene. I think he's really good at teeing things up for other actors. Like he's just so good. Like he knows when he has, especially with all the guest stars and with also obviously also the amazing supporting cast. He knows how to tee them up for their lines and time it just right so their line drops right at the right moment. He's really like we always talk about the show as jazz. It's like it's kind of it feels improv, but it's also very dialed, and everyone has their bar. There are a few bars in the track, and so it's fun for Seth to sort of be composing that in the scene. It's almost like he's the drummer for the scene, and he's just like kind of helping the camera move throughout it. Handing off the camera to different people.
so
I
you
think the jazz analogy was something that Seth came up with after we had shot the show, and it was just a totally spot on metaphor for what we were doing.
Yeah, he's a big music lover too, so that
Yeah.
makes sense. You've talked a lot about Seth, and it seems like you worked very, very closely with him. But did you work closely with the production designer, costume department to kind of build a cohesive look with the cinematography?
Oh yeah, 100%. I think Seth and Evan, co-direct, and they do a really good job of kind of setting everyone in motion. They know what they like, they know what's inspiring them, and they give really good kind of keywords and reference images for us to run with. So between me and Julie Berghoff, the production designer, and Claire, a set decorator, Cami, the costume, stylist, like everyone was really able to take something and run with it. We were really leaning into that old Hollywood vibe. And as far as how we were shooting it, I was really reliant on Julie and Claire to pull off a lot, in terms of finding great locations that had excellent available light. And then when they didn't, Claire finding ways to insert practicals so that I could, light the actors with that, because we couldn't set up lights on the set. I couldn't put a light on a stand. Everything is, off camera through a window. A lot of times we were really just rolling with, available light. So I really, worked closely with Julie to find locations that worked for us. And a lot of times that meant saying no to a lot of stuff before we found the right thing. But, I think it turned out amazing. And there's not a location in the show that I don't love.
I personally love Matt's office in the Continental Studios. That's
Yeah, that's really incredible. And Julie did such an amazing job designing that set. It was a challenge to shoot in a lot of ways because it had a lot of glass and a lot of reflections, but just the open air, atrium, the balconies, the stairs, all the different rooms. It was really like it was a playhouse for us as camera people.
I'd like you to talk a little bit about my personal favorite. It's kind of a toss up, to be honest. I think The Oner is my favorite episode of the season.
Mm.
I did like the finale as well, but I'm going to ask you about the episode The Oner that was episode 2, and it's so the whole joke in the episode is that Matt wants to come to set to see this Oner get captured in this film, and he kind of, without giving too much away, he kind of flubs it up. Can you talk a little bit about how you kind of almost made a meta movie and that you were covering this Oner and trying to shoot the Oner and shoot the people that were shooting the Oner? It drew me in so deeply.
Yeah, I mean, I think that episode was sort of the perfect metaphor for the show, in that studio executives are so excited about making movies. There's a reason why they're there, but they often get in the way of themselves and the project, and not always to their own fault, but sometimes to their own fault. And it was kind of a perfect metaphor for Matt's position in the studio and his job, right? So it was about him loving movies so much that he wanted to be there for their creation, but him being there was what ruined the movie. So it was, for us, pretty self-explanatory, and I think the most pleasurable for our crew to work on. Our crew really like reveled in that episode because we just got to see how, we got to show how hard we as crew members work and how difficult and complex and time sensitive our job is. And it also was really cool to show how everyone's job is so important, from the director down to the PA. It's like showing how even, a production assistant can make or break a shot. And that was really true for our crew, for the entirety of the show. When we're rolling, the whole set is alive. When you're shooting a TV show with 3 cameras and a ton of coverage, you kind of just assume that in the edit they're going to piece it all together and figure it out. And some cameras are going to be working well, others are not going to be getting great stuff. And you're kind of like, okay, we got enough coverage. They'll figure it out in the edit. But for us, it was like whenever you saw the monitor, that's what was going to be on TV. So everyone was glued to that, and everyone was focused on making that happen. So as us creating this studio, it felt very relevant to us, and obviously that's what the episode was about. So it felt like art imitating life in the best way. And it's also just fun to see Seth fuck up and be an idiot, and I think he's so good at that. So for us, it was just about creating the most insane, frenetic yet beautiful, hilarious episode we possibly could have.
For me, now I've watched the series twice. I've watched the first season twice, and for me, upon the second screening of the season, that's the point in which I start to empathize with Matt. At the end of that episode, like I'm totally on Matt's team. I want Matt to succeed. I know he's not going to. I know it's just going to be
A
a folly of errors going
train wreck.
forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like at the end of that episode, I as the viewer, I get so emotionally connected to him, and like I want him to win.
Mm,
Yeah, so it's
that's
a
cool. Not everyone has that response.
really, that's like my, I don't know, that's my episode.
Yeah, yeah.
The presentation is I think that's the name of the last one. That one almost has the same energy as the oneer, to
Mm,
be honest. So
yeah, yeah, totally.
watching it again, I was trying to watch it for cinematography this time as I was watching it, and I'm just curious. A lot of the shots seem very complex to me. Like there's a lot of moving parts. You talk about wanting to kind of get it and have just be as economical as possible with the filmmaking. And was there any
Hmm.
particularly like tricky shooting scenarios? I feel like there was a lot of blocking that had to happen beforehand, and a lot of it seemed very, I'm not a cinematographer, but a lot of it
Hmm.
seemed like it was probably tricky and you had to kind of overcome a few obstacles to get these shots. Is there one
Yeah, I mean, I think,
site?
yeah, I mean, I think every day we came in scratching our heads in the best way. Um, you know, first of all, we never really rehearsed anything. So the actors would show up on set, and me and the crew would, try to memorize the sides as best we could, to know roughly what was going to happen, and then Seth and Evan would walk through with the actors, and they would just start to slowly work through it. Seth called it tootling through it, where we would just kind of start by reading the sides out loud, and walking through it, and then slowly it would ramp up into getting into the blocking, getting into the motions, and then we'd find it. So then we would find the blocking, and Seth would look over at me and be like, okay, we can shoot that, right? And then we'd have to spend a couple hours figuring out how we were going to move the camera around. And a lot of times, there was a really simple way to shoot it, but we usually tried to complicate it as much as possible. That was sort of the fun of the show, is like, how can we make this more complex, more dynamic, more frenetic, more disorienting for the audience? So, it meant, trying to move through walls, move through windows, go downstairs, go upstairs, jump up a balcony, do things that, the audience wouldn't expect, to keep them on their feet. But I think the most challenging episode overall was definitely the Oneer episode two. Um, Mostly because, we wanted to shoot that as one shot. We wanted to, present that episode as one continuous take, because the whole idea is that Seth's character Matt shows up at sunset while they're shooting the magic hour shot, and if they don't get it, if the sun sets, then they don't get the shot and they don't get the movie. So there was like that sense of urgency there. So we had 4 days to shoot the episode. We knew we couldn't do the entire episode in one actual oneer, mostly because of cast availability. We didn't have all the cast all the days, so we had to piece it together a bit. Um, and so what we did is we literally just, did 4 blocks, started at the beginning on day one, and got as far as we could. And then day two got further, day three got further. And then day four was basically the end of it, where it was sunset into dusk and them driving off. And the big challenge with that was that we found this incredible location, the Silvertop House, which is just like one of the most incredible pieces of architecture in Los Angeles. It's so iconic, but it's also probably the least conducive location I've ever shot in. And that, uh, it's all glass walls, so you can see everything. There's nowhere to hide. It's on a ridge, so there's nowhere flat. There's about 20 feet of flat space on the property where you can park a vehicle. So you couldn't get trucks up there for gear. We had to, shuttle things up. I had nowhere to put like cranes to control daylight. A lot of times if we're trying to do a sunset, shot, but we don't want to do it at actually sunset. So to give us more time, I would use cranes to block the sun, and then other cranes to add fake sunlight. I couldn't do that because there was no space for cranes. So we really had to lean into just shooting at sunset. And we had to hope that over 4 days we had a somewhat consistent sunset so that it cut together. So we were really at the whim of the weather and the time, and it also just meant that we only had about 2 hours of a shooting window every day. So we would show up in the morning, rehearse the hell out of it, and then start rolling as soon as the sun got low enough in the sky. And then by the time the sun dropped, we were done for the day. So there was a real urgency to how we shot. And yeah, like I said, space was at a premium. So, crew were hiding behind little pillars, and, there was like nowhere to be. And it was very sophisticated because we also had other cameras on set that were the cameras within the show that were also filming. So we had to really coordinate all that. We had to have two camera crews. It was really something else for me, and it was really exciting, but it was definitely the biggest challenge we had.
Curious about creating high-quality YouTube videos? Enroll in video editing and production classes at Manhattan Edit Workshop to sharpen your skills and turn a hobby into a career. Start your journey to becoming a pro today.
Can I
Yeah.
ask, what month did you shoot that in?
Oh my God.
Do you remember? I'm just curious about the sunset and the time.
I'm gonna say I think it was probably May.
Mhm.
Yeah. Probably late May if I had to guess, sometime in the spring. So we had a decent sunset, but still that pocket where we really wanted it, which is like, the Sarah Pauli's film crew in the show, they're aiming for the perfect magic hour, which is really only like, when you're doing that as a filmmaker, there's about 30 minutes where you really want to shoot, and beyond that, before or after that, the sweet spot is gone. So um, we really had to just we had to nail it.
Sounds amazing. It sounds very stressful, but it
It
sounds.
was, yeah. And the other stressful thing was the fact that the bookend of them arriving by car and leaving by car, which was its own set of challenges, in that we had, the camera had to start on the car driving for, a half a mile up this winding driveway, then pop off the car. So we had the camera on a stabilized gimbal rig that was then on an electromagnet that was connected to the hood of the car, so that once the car stopped, there's a grip there that turns off the electromagnetic, so then someone can grab the camera and pull it off the hood of the car and keep going with it. And then we did the opposite when we left the house and got back onto the car. So there's just so much choreography behind the scenes with, the grips and electrics and camera team. I mean, there's, a dozen people involved with just moving the camera when we're shooting a shot like that. So their choreography and how dialed they are, we're so reliant on everything down to a little flip of a switch.
I can't even imagine who's
Very,
responsible
very,
for
very
that.
high stakes, very high stress. And also, that location wasn't a place we could come back to. That was a very expensive location, and it was in the middle of our shoot, and we didn't have a backup day, so we were really just, gun to our heads. We had to make it happen.
You've talked a lot about the Warner, and it's a jewel of the season for sure. But can you maybe point out another sequence or series of shots that you were really proud of for technical ambition or emotional impact?
I mean, I really love the opening of the show this season, the pilot, starting, within the movie, the Paul Dano movie, um, coming out of the monitor, being with Seth on set on a back lot. It starts out, looks like it's winter, it's snowing, and we pop out of the monitor, we realize it's a sunny day in LA, and then we get onto a golf cart and we drive off the set, and we realize we're on a back lot, and we realize we're out, at a studio. Then we ride on a golf cart, we pop off the golf cart, we get to the offices, we walk up to the offices, we move through the window into the set office, move through the bottom floor, then get onto a techno crane up to the second floor, and walk down the aisle the second floor. That was a massive sequence, and it was really just a way to tee up the whole show. And I was super proud of how that turned out.
Yeah, that it really drew you in. For people that have worked in the industry before, it's kind of like yay, and I think for people that haven't, maybe they can kind of understand, kind of sets,
Totally. Yeah.
a visual language or like this is what happens. Like this is what
No, yeah. I think sometimes movies or shows about our industry can feel kind of alienating, in my opinion. And I really love that this felt like an exciting introduction into the world. I think we gave the audience just enough to understand how the world works, but still keep it, somewhat mysterious and somewhat playful and fun.
Mhm.
Um, and there's nothing like too cynical about it. I think also sometimes pieces about our industry can be quite cynical. In some ways, this is, but it's always fun, and it's always about the love of filmmaking. And I think that's what I really appreciate about it, is that, like, as a filmmaker, I felt I felt like we were portraying sort of the absurdity and beauty of what we do.
So I have one more question for you, Adam. I'd like to know
Hmm.
what your guilty pleasure television or movie is, like maybe something you watch when you're traveling, or if it's on, you're always going to watch it, or maybe it's your comfort show.
The first one, if I'm on a plane and Dunkirk is on is available, I will always watch Dunkirk. I think I've watched that dozens of times. I think that's a perfect movie. Um, and I will just always put it on, and always be totally amazed by it. And the second thing is a YouTube show by Matty Matheson, who's a chef who I love, who was also in The Bear, and he does this show called Cooking Something, and I watch it every week when it comes out with my wife, and it's just the most comforting, beautiful thing to see him screaming at the camera and cooking something incredible, and I just love him so much.
I am writing that one down because I
It's
also
so good.
and I didn't realize that existed. So I'll
Yeah.
definitely check that out.
Nice.
Thank you so very much, Adam. It was really a pleasure talking to you. And that's it for this week. You can check us out at filmmakeru.com or follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_you. I'm Jamie Hitchings, and thanks for watching.